Yeah, here's a question actually. What's the difference between a strong female character in the East versus the West? What are examples of strong female characters from the East? I can answer this question really easily.
You sure about that?
They still act like women in the East. They're not just trying to be like absurd caricatures of men.
Yeah.
Right, so they still retain an element of femininity, and they don't like have this arrogant air about them, like I'm so much better than you. Usually they are just regular women who are thrust into positions where they're forced to do what they have to do to survive, or to help out their friends or whatever. Whereas over here in the West, yeah, they've been written as guys. They've got the swagger of guys, they've got the arrogance of guys, or at least what the writers imagine guys are like, and it's just completely different.
You watch the marketplace fight scene in Rings of Power and wonder, do these showrunners hate men? I watch the marketplace fight scene in Rings of Power and wonder, wait, are these showrunners doing an homage to the marketplace fight scene from 1983's The 8-Diagram Pole Fighter? We are not the same.
I know Kung Fu.
You have offended my family.
I got 3 weeks weapons training.
And you have offended the Shaolin Temple.
Ni hao, everyone. Welcome to the first video on the Armchair Black Belt channel. This is a space where I'll be publishing think pieces and video essays inspired by classic Hong Kong action cinema, from the Kung Fu classics of Shaw Brothers Studio through the Golden Harvest era to the rise of heroic bloodshed and other subgenres. Sometimes these videos will focus on a specific film. Other times, they will look at some broader themes of philosophy or folklore across a range of films. All of this through the lens of my vast personal experience with martial arts, reflected in the channel's name. Today, it's some of the broader themes of Chinese action cinema that I want to look at, because I think they can give us some valuable perspective on current-day culture war debates here in the West. Now, for those of you who don't know, the Scottish gentleman I clipped at the beginning of this video, the one who spoke so confidently and authoritatively on a subject he clearly knows nothing about, goes by the name of the Critical Drinker, and Drinker is sort of the center of gravity for a whole ecosystem of content creators who make a lot of noise on YouTube, and for some of them a lot of money too, by complaining about what they see as a troublesome trend in the portrayal of women in modern Hollywood genre pictures. The current term of art that Drinker and his orbiters, I'll call them his barflies, use to summarize this trend is girl boss. The barflies are all up in their feels about girl boss stories because they think these kinds of stories undermine traditional storytelling while also being the product of an insidious political agenda. But you don't need to take my word for that. I will be letting a lot of the barflies speak for themselves as we go on, while providing my own commentary. But before we get to that, if you like the content so far, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. At the time of this recording, I have 0 subscribers, so every little bit helps. I've got a lot of exciting content coming to this channel, including next week's video exploring the theme of warrior culture versus militarism in 1994's Fist of Legend, one of the best martial arts films ever made. Be sure to hit the bell so you can receive notifications of when that and other future videos are uploaded, and make sure to like and share this video and leave a comment below. All of that really helps the channel out a lot, and I really appreciate it. Now, back to the previously scheduled girl bosses.
Fucking gender ambiguity! Fucking current day Californian shit!
Let me start by doing something that I don't think anyone in the community of the barflies critics has ever done. I am going to steelman their arguments about the so-called girl boss. I'll rely mostly on clips from Drinker's video, Why Modern Movies Suck, the Strong Female Character, which he published before the term girl boss was popular, but he means basically the same thing. And I'll also supplement with some clips from other barfly channels who make the same arguments. Now, the standard response from folks like me to complaints about girl boss storytelling is to accuse the Drinker and the barflies of making arbitrary distinctions based on nostalgia and political narrative. For example, we might say that had Ripley or Sarah Connor been released today exactly as they appeared in Aliens or Terminator 2 40 years ago, the barflies would call them girl bosses too. And the only reason they don't call them that now is that their narrative depends on appeals to nostalgia. In other words, we would say that the Drinker classifies female action protagonists as girl bosses strictly on the basis either of whether their movie is from the 80s or 90s, or on the basis of the filmmaker's presumed modern politics. That is, we would say, they have no clear criteria for defining a girl boss, and it's all just sexist vibes. And I used to think that too. I used to make that exact same argument, but having looked closely and paid attention to their actual words, I now realize that was a mistake. The Drinker and the barflies have laid out specific criteria for what makes a girl boss, and those criteria are not just woman being action hero. A girl boss is not simply a female action protagonist. There are a collection of other narrative elements that get added to a female action protagonist that transform her into a girl boss. And these elements are as follows. Number 1. The girl boss is hyper-competent at a variety of action movie skills without explanation. There is no backstory, no mentor character, no training montage, no road of trials or other part of the hero's journey to explain why she is good at male-coded things like fighting. She is just dropped into a narrative, fully formed, and is automatically awesome. Specifically, she is capable of beating up men much larger than her, or rooms full of such men, without fighting like a girl, by cheating or using the environment or resorting to dirty tricks.
The first problem is one of competency. See, one of the core elements of any character arc is presenting them with a challenge or difficulty that they have to overcome, whether it's an opponent to be defeated, a goal to be reached, or even a personal failing or weakness that has to be tackled. All of this stuff requires the character to grow or change in some way to become better than who they were before. They'll often be given some kind of mentor figure to guide them on their path, and they're likely going to struggle and fail along the way. It's all part of the learning process, and the more you see a character suffer setbacks and personal failures, the more you tend to empathize with them. It's basic human nature. Storytellers have known this for thousands of years, which is why most stories tend to follow the same basic structure, taking the audience on an emotional roller coaster and delivering a satisfying payoff by the end. But strong female characters don't work that way. A strong female character will almost always be supremely good at whatever she does, either succeeding right off the bat or teaching herself with minimal effort. They're generally not allowed to have older mentors to teach them things, especially not male ones, because that would send out the message that women need men to help them succeed. The result is a character that doesn't really face any serious struggles or challenges, or suffer major setbacks that they have to bounce back from. They're almost never allowed to fail, because the writers incorrectly associate failure with weakness, rather than seeing it for what it actually is, a necessary part of personal growth. Failure itself doesn't define the character, it's how they react to it that matters. And if there's no failure, then there's no chance for growth and development. What strong female characters tend to focus on instead is self-actualization, the idea that she already has everything she needs to succeed, and all that's required is to let go of the limitations imposed on her by others. The message to the audience is simple: you're perfect the way you are, and it's the rest of the world that has to change. But the problem is that when you remove struggle, failure, weakness, and vulnerability, you don't leave the audience with a whole lot to empathize with. We don't need to feel invested in whether a strong female character is going to succeed, because the writers give us no reason to question or doubt it. And what you end up with instead is an empty shell of a character with the superficial appearance of strength and empowerment, but nothing substantial or meaningful driving it. And it all just comes across as wish fulfillment, the desires and angst of the writers to see their character do the things they always wished they could do.
And a lot of these things is they are super talented, super skilled without any real training or justification for it. They're just amazing, right? And then people might say, oh no, but they're bad at this or bad at that. But if that really doesn't affect the plot or come up in any significant way, just say, oh, I'm bad at this tangentially, then it really doesn't, give them a character flaw, does it?
Add that in there too. It has to be plot relevant, or else it doesn't really count.
Relevant, and you do say that in the video. I was like, yes, very good point. Because if it's
it
not
also
plot relevant,
that they have they don't want to portray women in any kind of a negative light, so they never have any character growth because they don't start from a position where they need fixing. Right.
Yeah, because they're supposed to already be awesome. It's just that the whole journey is about making the world realize how awesome they are.
The modern Disney heroine either rejects romance entirely or really struggles against it for a long time. She wields weapons or fights physically. She's one of the guys because being one of the girls would be terrible. And she's good at everything immediately. There's no training arc, because to suggest that you could ever teach a woman anything would be deeply misogynistic. We're just born knowing everything.
Number 2. She carries herself with the arrogance and swagger of a male character and doesn't behave like a traditionally feminine character who's been forced into extreme circumstances. She shows no weakness or emotional vulnerability that allows an audience to connect with her.
One other weird aspect of the strong female character is their general lack of human personality traits and redeeming qualities. Instead of being altruistic, or compassionate, or protective, or vulnerable, or quirky, they're almost always written as stoic, emotionally closed off, blunt, dismissive, prickly, domineering, or aggressive. The very same masculine traits that the writers seem to find so toxic and unacceptable in men. They very rarely have any kind of romantic interest in men and are carefully written and dressed to avoid even the barest hint of sensuality or attractiveness. Either way, it all just smacks of overcompensation, a kind of knee-jerk reaction to all those overly emotional, easily frightened damsels in distress from previous generations of movies. A desire to break away from the tropes of women as caring, compassionate maternal characters or overly sexualized fantasy figures. Fair enough, there's absolutely nothing wrong with branching out and exploring different ideas. The problem is that if you take all those feminine elements away and replace them with nothing but the most stereotypical of male traits, then all you really end up with are women awkwardly pretending to be men. Again, none of this is to say that you can't have assertive and authoritative female characters who speak their minds and fight their own corner, but you have to give them more than just the superficial facade of toughness. Just like how making them more physically powerful diminishes their bravery, and removing their challenges, weaknesses, and failures eats away at their relatability, so removing their emotional complexity and vulnerability makes them less likable. And the end result of all this is characters that are weirdly bland, sterile, sexless, emotionless, joyless, arrogant, condescending, and unappealing. People might not always be able to put into words what exactly is missing from them, but they know instinctively that what they're being shown just doesn't feel right, and it doesn't connect with them. And the more Hollywood tries to force these characters on us, the more people are rejecting them. It's kind of ironic when you think about it, that the strong female character should ultimately turn out to be their biggest weakness.
Number 3. Her wardrobe is rarely sexy. There are no skin-tight catsuits or short skirts or bikinis or low-cut blouses or anything else that shows off her womanly curves. Her clothes are always merely practical or too baggy or otherwise ill-fitting, and this serves the function of undermining the presumed male gaze to display that she exists for herself and not for the satisfaction of men.
When I look at how, whether it's a girl boss character or just a female character that is really trying to be promoted in movies today, there's always kind of a similarity to them in that they're trying to make them look as average as possible. And I gotta say, a lot of it is kind of unisex looking or even more masculine looking. Like anyone could wear desert robes or anyone could wear a spacesuit. There's nothing feminine about these outfits. And that's kind of what we get when we look at these various female action heroes promoted today, whether, a lot of them are Mary Sue characters or even the ones that might be better written. They're either average or frumpy. We have Yelena Belova in her tactical suit versus what we have with Black Widow with her cat suit, or they're grungy looking. Like, there's nothing feminine about these outfits. In fact, a lot of them are masculine. I believe the purpose of these costumes is either to present a female character as the equivalent of a male hero, a masculine hero, or in other cases, I think that there's just an attempt to make sure that they steer clear of the male gaze. And so that's why they're focused on these female characters looking average.
Number 4. Finally, and this is usually the most important one, her story includes no positive portrayals of male heterosexuality to balance out the girl boss energy. All of the men in her story are either simps, or cowards, or criminals, or misogynists, or too old, or aliens, or gay, or something else that makes them non-viable as a potential equal or a potential romantic or sexual partner. No man can ever deserve her.
And girl boss is character plus privilege plus politics equals power, which means that, a regular Mary Sue is just not necessarily political. It's just oh, we're having a good old time in our personalized adventure. So this is kind of your Rey, Riri Williams, Kamala Khan. They're not necessarily themselves anti-male, at least not in the beginning. However, the girl boss character is going in with a very anti-male attitude, like, oh, stupid men. Like she's like Captain Marvel, like she's there to make men feel pain, to prove herself better than men and everything. So it comes in with a very strong anti-male agenda.
This is the flaw with the girl boss thing as well. The girl boss wants to subvert and take away the role of the male hero and supplant it with the woman, right?
Right, because one thing I wanted to point out was that the girl boss specifically, they're usually invading a male space. They're usually in a male role, traveling a male's journey in a male franchise. But the thing is, they're written by women who have no idea what men value and how male traditions work, and so they kind of they know only women traditions, which is show up and you're awesome.
And when they try and supplant the male role with this girl boss character, there is this sense of vindictive bitterness, because it's not enough that this character is now, fulfilling the masculine archetype and role of the story. They also need to show that other men are pathetic in the same process.
Now, taken together, we can call these criteria the girl boss template, and I think Drinker and the Barflies have identified a real narrative phenomenon here. I would probably quibble about how widespread it actually is in Hollywood, or whether any specific character actually meets the criteria, but I do think that such characters do exist, and that they really are something separate from more traditional female action protagonists. You can quickly see how someone like Ripley in Aliens or Sarah Connor in Terminator 2 do not qualify as girl bosses under this rubric. For one thing, each of those movies is a sequel, so the badass woman protagonist in them comes with the backstory of their first movie built in. Sarah Connor's primary emotional connection in Terminator 2 is to her son, John, not to another female character. Ripley in Aliens is largely motivated by protecting Newt, the little girl, but she also has significant flirtatious interactions with Hicks, making them all into a de facto nuclear family unit. Indeed, notably, both Ripley and Sarah Connor are acting on maternal instincts, a deeply traditionally feminine motivation translated into more outwardly masculine behaviors. And all of this is why they don't qualify as girl bosses under the Drinker's criteria, despite being badasses in other ways. So, the girl boss template is a real thing, and it is clearly defined. Nonetheless, Drinker and his Barflies are still being fundamentally dishonest when they complain about girl bosses, because while they might be correct that the girl boss template is real, and that it really is something different from a standard female action character, they are, all of them, telling a gigantic lie about where the girl boss template comes from and why it exists. You see, the narrative that Drinker has built around the girl boss is that it's the product of modern Hollywood, more specifically, that it's the product of bitter feminist activists like Kathleen Kennedy or Leslie Headland, who have infiltrated Hollywood and are trying to socially engineer their matriarchal utopia by forcing the rest of us to endure their insufferable self-insert power fantasies in the forms of Mary Sues and girl bosses like Rey or Captain Marvel. This is all part of what Drinker calls the message. You could even say that this claim about bitter 21st century activists inventing the girl boss template is the foundation of his and the Barflies' entire narrative about modern movies. So it would be really inconvenient to his narrative if that claim turned out to be complete bullshit. Spoiler alert, it's complete bullshit. To see why, let's take another look at my opening clip, this time with a bit of different editing.
Fucking gender ambiguity! Fucking current day Californian shit!
Yeah, here's a question actually. What's the difference between a strong female character in the East versus the West? What are examples of strong female characters from the East? I can answer this question really fucking easily. They still act like women in the East.
Introducing Xu Jinfang, one of China's earliest action heroines.
They're not just trying to be like absurd caricatures of men.
Yeah.
right? So they still retain an element of femininity, and they don't like have this arrogant air about them, like I'm so much better than you.
In 1930, she starred in supposedly the first Chinese martial arts film ever, The Swordswoman of Huangjiang, effectively making her not only the first Da-Nu ever, but the first action star in China.
Usually they are just regular women who are thrust into positions where they're forced to do what they have to do to survive, or to help out their friends or whatever.
The Swordswoman of Huangjiang is a 13-part series, in which the titular swordswoman goes through a serialized adventure, fighting giant birds and stuff. All but one film is lost to history, and the remaining footage is damaged beyond repair.
Whereas over here in the West, yeah, they've been written as guys. They've got the swagger of guys, they've got the arrogance of guys, or at least what the writers imagine guys are like, and it's just completely different.
Yet we can still see her performance quite well. Confident, slightly unkempt, and takes a bite right out of a piece of metal. Strength is how she rolls. Compared to other movies from the same era, Xu's character shows little traditional feminine beauty. This shows that, at the time, strength was largely synonymous with masculinity. For a woman to be strong, she must exhibit the quality of a man, down to the unkempt appearance. But beautiful or not, as you can see from newspaper articles, she was popular indeed.
One of the most popular character types in Chinese genre films for almost 100 years now has been the Da-Nu, the so-called battle-ready woman, or combat woman, or fighting woman. From her first film appearance in 1930 all the way up through the current day, the battle-ready woman has been a staple of Chinese genre filmmaking. Almost every major actress of every generation of Chinese cinema has played a combat woman character at least once. Some have made entire careers out of it. And while there are many types of Da-Nu characters, the ones who check off every box of the girl boss template have been around for as long as the Chinese have been making movies. In fact, they've been around a lot longer than that, but we'll get there. Now, as noted in the earlier clip from Accented Media, the actress Xu Chenfeng played a strong female character in 1930 who was the first action hero in Chinese cinema, and a look at her story reveals some very interesting information. Now, much of the original film print has been lost, but the surviving 74 minutes are enough for us to reconstruct the basic plot of the first movie in her Swordswoman of Huangjiang series titled Uproar at the Baolin Temple. To start with, Xu's character, Fang Yuqing, the Swordswoman of Huangjiang, is already a renowned warrior at the start of the story, and this is actually rather commonplace in the wuxia genre, which rarely features modern Western conventions like the hero's journey. And sidebar here, the hero's journey is a modern American invention, not an ancient universal storytelling template as so many of the barflies claim, but that's a subject for another video. In fact, a video I made on my main channel, linked on screen and in the description below if you're interested. Anyway, the swordswoman and her brother, as befits the heroes of a wuxia tale, show up to offer their services to a village where a young boy has been snatched up by a giant golden-eyed eagle monster. 2 magical leaps across a canyon and 1 sword fight against the bird monster later finds the young boy rescued and returned to his village. The swordswoman and her brother remain long enough for her donkey to get stolen by a thief who turns out to be another swordswoman in disguise. After being caught and defeated, this rival warrior confesses that she stole the swordswoman's donkey to test her, to make sure she was worthy before asking for her help. The rival reveals that her own village is being terrorized by outlaws and requests the swordswoman's assistance in driving the villains away. The 2 warriors make peace and move farther down the road to rest in what appears to be the titular Baolin Temple. However, the Buddhist monks there are actually old enemies of the swordswoman in disguise, and this leads to a large, swashbuckling set-piece battle as the swordswoman and her friend take on a whole army of bad guys. Sadly, the surviving film stock ends there, so we don't know how this story ends, but we do know the heroine survives because she got 12 sequels. And the film was remade decades later in 1970's Lady of Steel, starring Chong Pei-pei in the title role. But we'll get to her in a moment. What's notable here is that in this nearly century-old Chinese film, the action heroine protagonist doesn't behave in any way like the critical drinker claims strong female characters in Eastern cinema behave. She has no backstory to explain her fighting skills. She swaggers around like a man, dresses like a man, and is not a traditionally feminine normal woman who's thrust unwillingly into an extreme situation. She is capable of fighting and defeating men in single combat and of taking on hordes of male attackers. With no male love interest anywhere in sight. Basically, the swordswoman of Huangzhang was a girl boss. In 1930.
Oh my god. Oh my god.
What's also notable here is that the Chinese audiences of the time didn't find any of this weird. On the contrary, her character was immensely popular. Remember, she got 12 sequels. And this is a pattern that will repeat itself multiple times across the history of Chinese cinema. And it's ironically because of sexism. You see, when Chinese cinema was in its infancy, screen acting was considered beneath the dignity of male actors, so Chinese filmmakers had to turn to female performers to cast a lot of their roles, including their genre action roles. So Chinese film audiences quickly grew accustomed to seeing women on screen behaving like stereotypical men, both because these women were sometimes playing male characters and because the industry had not quite cracked the code for feminine warriors, so the performers in female action roles relied on the only template they had for communicating power and strength in a fight. They modeled typical male behavior. Now, this filmic tradition of girl bossery that Xu established was followed in 1960s post-war Chinese cinema by more actresses who made careers with combat woman roles. Actresses like Polly Sheng-Quan, who starred in 1968's Dragon Gate Inn and was described as the Phoenix to Bruce Lee's Dragon, or Xu Feng, who starred in 1970's A Touch of Zen. But the real blockbuster actress of 1960's fighting woman wuxia genre pictures was Chong Pei-pei, who shot to international stardom as the lead of 1966's Come Drink With Me, now considered a classic of the genre. In Come Drink With Me, Chong plays the famous detective Golden Swallow, who dresses like a man, carries herself with the swagger and arrogance of a man, single-handedly defeats entire rooms of men, and gets reacted to by most of the characters on screen as if she were a man, even if they know she's not. She also faces off against an extremely feminine-coded male villain, adding more gender confusion to this whole conversation. Chung starred in more than 20 wuxia films as either the lead or a supporting role, with a career that spanned decades, including roles in Stephen Chow's Flirting Scholar and Ong Lee's Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, a film that the critical drinker likes to clip quite a lot without demonstrating any understanding at all of its cinematic heritage. She also played the swordswoman of Huangzhang, just like Xu Qinfeng before her in 1970's Lady of Steel, where she is once again seen single-handedly fighting an entire monastery full of men. Chung was the face of the battle-ready woman through the 1960s, only to have it taken up by Bruce Lee's co-star Angela Mao in the 1970s. Mao was the tip of the spear for the fighting woman genre across that decade in classic films like Hapkido and Lady Whirlwind, along, of course, with Enter the Dragon, where she played Bruce Lee's ass-kicking sister. And in most of these roles, Mao checked off every box of the girl boss template. Mao's rise to fame coincided with the golden age of Shaw Brothers Studios, previously the main source of classic kung fu and wuxia films. Although she was contracted with their rivals at Golden Harvest, Shaw Brothers clearly had their fingers to the wind because at about the same time, they doubled down on the battle-ready woman trope by producing The 14 Amazons, a massive historical epic that is one of my personal favorite Shaw Brothers films from this period. 14 Amazons is a grand, sweeping epic in the vein of Western films like Lawrence of Arabia or The Ten Commandments, featuring an enormous cast of extras for colossal set-piece war scenes filmed on location and against sumptuous matte painting backgrounds. It tells a 1,000-year-old story from Chinese mythic history about the women of the Yang family, who lead a renegade army against the Xia Emperor after all the men in their bloodline are murdered, while also fending off bureaucratic betrayals from within their own allied Song Dynasty government. The film featured nearly every actress on Shaw Brothers' roster at the time, what we today would call a stacked cast, and became a multiple award winner at several Asian Film Awards ceremonies. In some ways, 14 Amazons' success cemented Shaw Brothers' foundation for the many genius films that would follow, and Chinese audiences and filmmakers remembered the film fondly for generations. Eventually, it was remade as the far inferior but still entertaining Legendary Amazons in 2011, produced by Jackie Chan and featuring Chong Pei Pei in a major supporting role. And yes, I did just say that the story is 1,000 years old. Now, I think it could be debated whether any of the woman characters in the film version can be classified as a girl boss proper. After all, they have pretty grounded motivations in avenging their husbands' and sons' murders. But it does drive home the point that tales of warrior women, some of whom would be classified as girl bosses under the Drinker's rubric, are very old indeed. We'll come back to this point later. But after all of that, it was the 1980s when Hong Kong's film technologies and philosophies got a major upgrade that saw the real explosion of Chinese movies featuring female characters who tick off every single criteria of the girl boss template. As directors like Jackie Chan, Sammo Hung, Corey Yun, John Woo, and Yuen Woo-ping were revolutionizing choreography, cinematography, and editing to produce some of the most dynamic action scenes ever committed to film, opportunities for fresh new faces and talents expanded exponentially, and into this booming demand stepped some of the most incredible female action performers the world has ever seen. Ground zero for this explosion of new girl bosses was 1985's Yes, Madam, the first starring vehicle for both Michelle Yeoh and Cynthia Rothrock. In this film, both of the female leads meet every criteria to be considered a girl boss by the critical drinker. On top of being hyper-competent fighters who don't need no man to help them and having no backstories to explain any of this, the movie also goes out of its way to portray every male character in the story, without exception, as either a simp, a coward, a sexist pig, an idiot, or a criminal. The two lady cops never suffer and have no real character arcs. They're just badass from the first frame to the last. They swagger around like tough guys and heap physical abuse and insults on men who get in their way.
I'm sorry, they lack some decorum. I know the type. It's usually very little dick and all aura.
And you know what? Audiences ate that shit up. The film was so popular that the studio who produced it and their rivals in the Hong Kong system rushed into production on a whole slew of new movies featuring exactly this kind of female character. And thus was born the subgenre called Girls with Guns, which later migrated into anime and manga but got its start in Hong Kong action cinema. Girls with Guns generated entire franchises like the Iron Angels series, or the In the Line of Duty franchise, or the Inspector Wears Skirts films. It produced hit standalone movies like Angel Terminators and She Shoots Straight and Blonde Fury, also called Lady Reporter. And it made international stars out of women like Yeoh and Rothrock, along with Moon Lee, Yukari Oshima, Joyce Godenzi, Cynthia Khan, Yung Pan Pan, Kara Wee, and a host of others. Now, this trend burned hot for well over a decade, and in some ways, it never died. Its influence spread far and wide across the world, including into Hollywood, and this is the proximate source of the girl boss trope in modern Hollywood. Not infiltration by bitter feminists from Ivy League Marxist book clubs, but cross-cultural percolation of an incredibly popular subgenre of global cinema that was, at its height, a hit pretty much everywhere in the world, except the United States. Alongside the girls with guns trend, 80s and 90s Hong Kong cinema also saw a renaissance of wuxia and traditional kung fu films that offered expanded roles for women and produced some borderline girl bosses, along with a few full-fledged cases. 1987's Magnificent Warriors saw Michelle Yeoh single-handedly defeating an entire army of well-armed men. 1994's Wing Chun, again starring Michelle Yeoh, gave us a heroine capable of defeating crowds of men and who easily smacks down the male villain in single combat at the end, while Donnie fucking Yen waits in the wings for her. 1997's Tai Chi Master, directed by Yuen Woo-ping, starring Jet Li and, you guessed it, Michelle Yeoh, took place in a strange alternate world where pretty much every female character knows how to fight and no one questions it. If you've noticed Michelle Yeoh's name coming up a lot here, that's not a coincidence. Yeoh was a superstar in Chinese and global cinema, a dynamic and photogenic action performer who captivated audiences as an action lead for decades before the critical drinker said this about her in his review of Everything Everywhere All at Once.
She takes all of this in her stride. She commands the screen like the leading lady she never quite got to be. The leading lady she never quite got to be. The leading lady she never quite got to be. The leading lady she never quite got to be.
Now, if there is a critical drinker clip that better demonstrates his total ignorance of Asian cinema, while nonetheless speaking as if he's an expert on the subject, I can't think of one. Except maybe the one I opened this video with.
There's a reason people, like in the West, are starting to draw more and more towards, Korean or Japanese filmmaking. It's precisely because it's a bit different from what we get. And that's a good thing.
Yeah, what is the most recent Japanese film, or at least entertainment, that you enjoyed so far?
What am I thinking of? See, a lot of them would be older ones, like Old Boy, for example. I really enjoyed that one. I know it's not Japanese, but yeah, probably stuff like that. Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, I really like that. And it's like Chinese, I think. But yeah, like it's...
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
Fucking gender ambiguity! Fucking current day Californian shit!
Michelle Yeoh's Yes Madam co-star Cynthia Rothrock is also an interesting case study against the backdrop of the drinker's obsession with 80s and 90s American action cinema, because on paper, she should have been at least as successful in the US market as Steven Seagal, or Jean-Claude Van Damme, or Dolph Lundgren. She was, after all, objectively better than all of them. A holder of 5 different black belts by the time she was 23, Rothrock, before her Hong Kong career, had become a household name in the global martial arts community by showing up to open tournaments where there were no women's divisions, competing against men, and walking away with first-place trophies almost every time. She was already recognized as one of the best in the world in her respective martial arts, not one of the best women, simply one of the best, period. She was recruited into Hong Kong films straight out of a martial arts demonstration in Los Angeles, where she was performing as part of Ernie Reyes Sr.'s renowned performance team. And after a string of hit Hong Kong films in which she performed spectacular action choreography despite a chronic knee injury that required her to fight with her weaker side, Rothrock attempted to break into Hollywood, thinking that her Hong Kong filmography and martial arts bona fides would at least be enough to get her pitch meetings with respected action producers. But at almost every turn, she was denied opportunities for lead projects and rarely got cast in American productions as anything but lady cop sidekicks or single-scene karate moms in straight-to-video projects. All while less talented men like Lundgren, Seagal, and Van Damme were signed to 7-figure contracts. She was at one point told to her face by a male Hollywood executive that she hadn't been able to break through because she wasn't good looking enough and didn't make a credible screen fighter. Now, Rothrock was an attractive woman, in my opinion, but she was muscular and athletic, not demure and helpless looking like American action movies of the day preferred. Cultural beauty standards fluctuate and personal tastes vary, fair enough. But to look at footage like this and say that Rothrock didn't make a credible screen fighter is to simply be detached from reality. And that's really what all this girl boss hatred comes down to. The Hollywood action scene of the 80s and 90s was unable to see Rothrock as a credible on-screen fighter, not through any fault in her talent, but because of their own short-sighted, preconceived notions of what women are actually capable of. And it's the same reason Drinker and his barflies struggle with so-called girl bosses. They simply can't conceive of a real woman who is capable of the things Cynthia Rothrock and Michelle Yeoh in their primes were capable of doing. And that's not because women are actually incapable of doing those things, it's because the barflies' notions about gender and sex bear no resemblance to reality. Now, they like to tell themselves and their audiences that they are simply defending traditional storytelling from dangerous modern political agendas. And baked into this argument is an assumption, sometimes explicitly stated, that traditional storytelling and traditional gender roles are grounded in biological or metaphysical reality. That the girl boss is unbelievable as a character, not just because men are endowed with cartoonishly insurmountable advantages like greater average upper body strength or greater average bone density, but also because women are inherently less aggressive than men. And in this worldview, girl boss storytelling has to be framed as a modern transgression, because admitting that it's older than 21st century bitter American activists would be to call their entire worldview into question. Which would explain why the Drinker and his barflies seem to go out of their way not just to be willfully ignorant of Hong Kong cinema, but to actively hide it from their audiences precisely by speaking authoritatively on the subject while not actually knowing anything about it. It's a shell game, born from the very same chauvinist assumptions that enabled 90s Hollywood producers to look upon championship-level perfection in the form of Cynthia Rothrock and still convince themselves that she was not a credible screen fighter.
Fucking gender ambiguity! Fucking current-day Californian shit!
Now, after this whirlwind tour of classic Hong Kong girl bossery, you might be wondering what the point of it all even was. So let's circle back to the steel manning I did of Drinker and the Barflies. My point here has not been to argue that girl bosses aren't real. I think they are. Hong Kong cinema is full of them. Nor has it been to argue that girl bosses are either good or bad storytelling. As with any other character archetype, it depends on the execution. There have been both good and bad girl boss movies. In fact, I would argue that some of the Hong Kong movies I've mentioned here were not very good, aside from their generally excellent fight choreography. What I'm attacking here is the Barflies' explanation for why girl boss characters exist and where they come from. Their foundational claim that the girl boss arises from activist writers in modern Hollywood is proven wrong by a cursory glance at Hong Kong cinema of the 80s and 90s, and this is not an opinion question. So, you might be wondering then, why does girl boss storytelling exist at all? Where does this all come from?
Well, we now live in a world of corporate anxiety where they're all panicking about being potentially problematic on Twitter. They don't want to show you traditional values or traditionally feminine women or anything like that because they're afraid of being called out for being old-fashioned or misogynistic or any number of buzzwords you'd find on Twitter or BuzzFeed, if that's even a thing anymore. So that inherent fear of backlash leads to overcorrection in the rewrites, and studios now assume that modern audiences won't respect characters or projects with softer or more romantic traits.
Well, that's one idea. I have a better one. Girl boss storytelling is an attempt to reconnect with a part of human nature that too many societies suppress. As Snarky J points out in the video that I just clipped her from, women are human. And like all humans, they possess combative instincts. Call it a warrior spirit. Now, obviously, there's variation in how strong those instincts are in any given woman or in any other person of any other gender, but they are still there. And that's because humans are animals, subject to the forces of natural selection. Every animal species that we know of teaches both its male and female young how to fight. That's what play is in non-human animals. It's a training regimen, teaching the young how to tap into their combative instincts to hunt or fight for their lives. But unlike any other species we know of, humans sometimes do this weird thing where we teach half of our young, the half we assign female at birth, not to fight, to suppress their natural warrior spirit so they can conform to traditional gender roles. These so-called traditional roles exist to constrain women's natures, not to enable them, because women who can fight are harder to control. Back when I was training as a padded instructor for a respected women's self-defense nonprofit, we called this learned helplessness, and it's a tool of social control. One of the most pervasive ways that male chauvinism or male supremacy or patriarchy or whatever you want to call it gets internalized into little girls so that their helplessness feels natural to them. But it's not. They learned it. But the warrior spirit cannot be suppressed forever. So when a society becomes too controlling of its women, what we now call girl bosses emerge in stories as a kind of safety valve that's also an act of defiance. Whether it's the Amazons of ancient Greco-Roman myth, or the Danu of Chinese cinema, or the modern Hollywood girl boss, these stories are ways for people to reclaim and express a little bit of that suppressed natural warrior instinct that all women possess as part of their human birthright. So rather than being rebels against a radical woke intrusion into cinema, The Critical Drinker and his barflies are actually voices of the anti-human status quo. And the way they talk about women and the application of physical violence just tells me that they have never done any fight training. But that's a subject for another day. Thanks for watching this video. Once again, a reminder and a request to please sub to this channel for more videos where I overthink goofy kung fu movies from the golden age of Hong Kong cinema. Until then, take care.